43 people have been executed in North Carolina. This is part 1 of the series. James William Hutchins, March 16, 1984, lethal injection. He was a suspected serial killer who was believed to have killed 4 individuals across 2 different states, and he was also questioned in connection with the death of a 5th man in a 3rd state. In 1954, he was charged with murdering a man in New Mexico, but during the trial, he claimed self-defense and was ultimately convicted of voluntary manslaughter rather than murder. Years later, he was convicted of murdering 3 law enforcement officers in North Carolina in 1979. For these crimes, he received a death sentence. His execution was carried out on March 16, 1984, at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina, using lethal injection. This execution marked a historic moment as he became the first person to be executed in North Carolina since 1977. His last meal was a steak sandwich and a soft drink. He didn't have any last words. Margie Velma Barfield, November 2, 1984, lethal injection. By 1977, after 2 marriages had ended with the deaths of her husbands, Velma Barfield was in a relationship with Stuart Taylor, a widower and tobacco farmer. As she had done for years, Barfield falsified checks from Taylor's bank account to fund her addiction to prescription drugs. Fearing that her fraudulent activities had been discovered, she poisoned Taylor by mixing an arsenic-based rat poison into his beer and tea. Taylor quickly became very ill, and Velma volunteered to nurse him. As his condition continued to deteriorate, she took him to the hospital where he died a few days later. However, an autopsy revealed that the cause of Taylor's death was arsenic poisoning, leading to Barfield's arrest and charge for his murder. During the trial, her defense pleaded insanity, but this was rejected and she was ultimately convicted. The jury recommended the death sentence. Throughout the trial, Velma appeared cold and uncaring, and on one notable occasion, she even applauded the district attorney during his closing statement. Later, Barfield confessed to several other murders, including the 1974 death of her own mother, in whose name she had taken out a loan, as well as the murders of 2 elderly individuals, John Henry Lee, for whom she had worked as a housekeeper and caregiver, and Dolly Edwards, a relative of Stuart Taylor. In a disturbing pattern, Velma consistently attended the funerals of her victims, appearing to grieve genuinely despite having caused their deaths. Further investigation revealed that the body of her late husband, Thomas Barfield, had been exhumed and found to contain traces of arsenic, though Velma denied having killed him. According to Barfield, her motives for the 4 murders were financial. She claimed that after misappropriating money from her victims, she had tried to make them ill so that she could care for them while simultaneously finding another job to repay the stolen funds. However, the jury found this explanation unconvincing and remained unimpressed by her defense. Velma Barfield subsequently gained notoriety as the death row granny, becoming the first woman executed in the U.S. since 1962 and notably the first woman to be executed after the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976.
Isolation from everybody that I had been with for almost 6 years. The last 10 years was just like that, years of a drug nightmare. Days of not knowing where you are or what you've done. Living in prison every day is a struggle, even at its best. And I know that without him and his strength that has sustained me, I couldn't have made it even thus far. I'm sorry for the hurt that I've caused so many people. Today, if it were possible, I wish that I could take every bit of hurt on myself.
In her final statement, Barfield apologized to the families of her victims for the pain she had caused. She also thanked those who had supported her during her 6 years on death row. Before the execution, she reportedly told a family friend that her death would be a gateway to heaven. For her last meal, Barfield requested a simple combination of cheese doodles and a Coca-Cola. A Kit Kat bar, a known favorite, was given to her by the warden as a gift. She reportedly told officials that she was not hungry for a full meal. John William Rook, September 19, 1986, lethal injection. Rook abducted Anne Roche, a 25-year-old nurse, from the parking lot of a hospital. Over the course of several hours, he subjected her to repeated assaults, including essay, as well as physical torment. He beat her with a tire iron, inflicted cuts using a fishing knife, and ultimately ran her over with his car, causing her death. The attack demonstrated both premeditation and extreme brutality, highlighting the horrific nature of the crime. Rook's last meal request consisted of 12 hot dogs all the way. However, he only ate 3 of them. He was allowed to wear his own clothes during his execution, which consisted of a Harley-Davidson t-shirt, blue jeans, and his dingo boots. Just before his execution, Rook's last words were, "Freedom. Freedom at last, man. It's been a good one." Michael Van McDougall, October 18, 1991, lethal injection. He tricked his neighbors, 27-year-old Diane Parker and her 26-year-old roommate Vicky Duno, into entering his residence by telling them that his wife had been injured. Once the women were inside, McDougall attacked them violently with a butcher knife. Parker was killed in the assault, sustaining over 22 stab wounds, while Duno was stabbed 9 times but managed to survive the vicious attack. McDougall's past included a history of drug-related activities, and he had previously been convicted of essaying a 31-year-old woman when he was 18 years old, highlighting a long-standing pattern of criminal and violent behavior. Michael Van McDougall's last meal consisted of 2 small ribeye steaks and French fries. For breakfast on his final day, he ate 3 pancakes, sausage, and cereal. When asked if he had any final words, McDougall simply replied, "Okay." He also appeared to wink at his lawyer just before the lethal injection was administered. He was described as calm and cooperative in his final hours. John Sterling Gardner Jr., October 23, 1992, lethal injection. Gardner forcibly broke into the home of 72-year-old Ray Shaver and shot him to death, committing a violent and unprovoked attack. Just a few days later, Gardner carried out another lethal assault during a robbery at a restaurant targeting 2 employees, 24-year-old Kim Miller and 21-year-old Richard Adam, both of whom were fatally shot during the incident. In addition to the murders, Gardner stole $2,700 from the cash registers, further compounding the criminal nature of his actions. He maintained his innocence until the end. His last words were, "I feel deep regret and sorrow for the victims' families. Though they believe that I did what I was convicted of, I did not, but I feel sorry for them, that's all." There is no record of his final meal. David Scarborough Lawson, June 15, 1994, gas chamber. In December 1980, Lawson shot Wayne Shin in the back of the head after being interrupted during a burglary at Shin's home. During the same incident, Lawson also shot Wayne's father, Buren Shin, in the back of the head and left him for dead. Remarkably, the elder Shin survived the attacks and later identified Lawson as the person responsible for his son's murder. Wayne Shin, who worked as an electrician, was married and the father of a 10-year-old son and a 3-year-old daughter, making his death a devastating loss for his family. At the time of his execution, Lawson had the option to choose lethal injection but refused, stating that selecting his method of death would effectively endorse or sanction his execution. As a result, he was executed by the default method in the state at that time, which was the gas chamber. He screamed, I'm human," as the cyanide gas arose around him. Witnesses in the viewing gallery heard Lawson screaming through the chamber's double-paned windows. He also reportedly yelled, "Don't kill me," during his final moments. There is no record of his final meal. Kermit Smith Jr., January 24, 1995, lethal injection. Smith abducted 20-year-old Willette Collins along with 2 other 19-year-old women whose identities were not publicly disclosed during a basketball game. He essayed Collins, then exposed her body to the freezing cold and ultimately crushed her head with cinder blocks, committing an exceptionally brutal murder. The other 2 women, determined to avoid the same fate as Collins, fought back against Smith, overpowered him, and escaped into the nearby woods. They were eventually able to flag down a passing motorist and contact the police, providing crucial information for his apprehension. Smith had a long-standing history of misogyny, and investigators determined that his crimes were entirely motivated by a desire to kill women. While awaiting execution, he continued to attack prison guards and other death row inmates, demonstrating a persistent pattern of violent behavior and lack of remorse. Kermit Smith Jr.'s last meal consisted of 4 pieces of KFC, a Mountain Dew, and a Pepsi. Just before the lethal injection was administered, Smith said, "Lord, have mercy on your souls." Smith requested that Collins's mother personally administer his lethal injection, but the request was denied. Philip Lee Engel, September 22, 1995, lethal injection. Engel gained entry to the home of an elderly married couple, 68-year-old William and 67-year-old Margaret, after discovering that their door had been left unlocked. Once inside, he launched a savage attack, using an axe handle as a weapon to bludgeon both victims to death. Only a few months later, Ingalls struck again. This time, he forced his way into the residence of another elderly pair, 70-year-old E.Z. Willis and his 67-year-old wife Sarah. The assault that followed was equally brutal. Ingalls beat both victims repeatedly with a tire iron, killing them in their own home. Despite the ferocity of the attack, E.Z. Willis managed to fight back, striking Ingalls across the face with his cane and inflicting a deep wound before succumbing to his injuries. When investigators later questioned him about the motive behind the killings, Ingalls showed no remorse. Instead, he chillingly admitted, "I like watching people die in agony." His record revealed that this wasn't his first act of violence. Before committing the murders, Ingalls had already been convicted of multiple assaults and burglaries, which then escalated into the series of gruesome murders that ultimately sealed his fate. Ingalls' last meal consisted of a medium rare steak, a baked potato, a tossed salad, and butter pecan ice cream. When asked if he had any last words, Ingalls made a lengthy statement, portions of which he also shouted as he was being taken to the death chamber. In his final statement, and as he was being taken to the execution room, Ingalls proclaimed he was going to heaven and that he did not fear death. He offered forgiveness and asked for forgiveness from those he had wronged. He also apologized to the victims' families, explaining his decision to stop his appeals so they could find peace. Ricky Lee Sanderson, January 30, 1998, gas chamber. Sanderson abducted 16-year-old Sue Holliman from her own home, forcibly removing her from the safety of her residence. Over the course of the attack, he essayed her, strangled her, and stabbed her to death, demonstrating a shocking level of violence and brutality. He disposed of her body in a remote farmer's field, leaving her there to be discovered later. Investigators determined that Sanderson was also responsible for at least 2 additional essays, revealing a pattern of predatory and violent behavior beyond this singular murder. Sanderson declined to request a special last meal prior to his execution. Like other inmates at Central Prison, he was served the standard meal, which included scalloped potatoes, ham, broccoli, salad, bread, and a beverage. However, he refused to eat the meal provided. Instead, he chose to consume a honey bun that he had previously ordered from the prison commissary, ignoring the traditional last meal offered to him. When he was asked if he had any last words, he said, "I'm dying for a deed I did, and I deserve death for it, and I'm glad Christ forgave me." Zane Brown Hill, August 14, 1998, lethal injection. Following a confrontation at his estranged wife's home regarding a restraining order, Hill fatally shot their 29-year-old son Randall. In the chaos that followed, when his wife attempted to intervene to protect their son, Hill struck her on the head with the butt of his firearm, inflicting additional injury. Hill had a long history of domestic abuse and had previously been the subject of numerous complaints for harassing his family. Zane Brown Hill's last meal consisted of fried chicken, fries, and Coca-Cola. When asked for a final statement, Hill's last words were an expression of love to his wife, Bonnie Hill, and an apology for his actions. Earlier in his time on death row, he had told a reporter, "Let's get it over with." John Thomas Noland Jr., November 20, 1998, lethal injection. Seeking revenge against his ex-wife for leaving him with their children, Noland went to the home of his ex-wife's sister, 22-year-old Cynthia Milton, and fatally shot her. After killing Milton, he crossed the street to the residence of his ex-wife's parents. There, he shot and killed her father, 62-year-old Troy, and wounded her mother, 57-year-old Mary, leaving her seriously injured. This series of attacks demonstrated a deliberate and vengeful targeting of his ex-wife's family. His last meal was a large pepperoni pizza, burrito supreme, and 6 Diet Cokes. His last words were, "Well, I made one final statement, but I just want to say that I'm sorry that I caused so many people so much pain. But it's weird that so many people returned with love. I caused a lot of people a lot of pain, and other people gave me an awful lot of love. As I said in my statement, I feel like I'm a very lucky man." James David Rich, March 26, 1999, lethal injection. Rich was originally sentenced to life in prison for the shooting murder of an unidentified individual during a burglary. Several years into his sentence, while attempting to avoid participation in a prison education program, Rich stabbed a fellow inmate, 45-year-old Paul Gwynn, to death. Prior to his murder at the hands of Rich, Gwen had been incarcerated for the essay of a teenage girl, adding context to the violent environment within the prison in which the incident occurred. Rich's last meal was pizza and Pepsi. In his final statement, he praised Allah as he became a Muslim while on death row. He asked for mercy for the world and all people. Harvey Lee Green, September 24, 1999, lethal injection. Green pled guilty to the murders of a teenage schoolgirl and a customer that occurred during a robbery at a dry cleaning store in Pitt County in 1983. On December 19, 1983, Green carried out a violent robbery at Young's Cleaners in Bethel, North Carolina. During the crime, he bludgeoned Sheila Marlene Bland, a 17-year-old high school student working as the store's cashier, to death, and also killed John Michael Edmondson, a 33-year-old church organist who was in the store as a customer. Within a few weeks of the murders, Green confessed the crimes to the police. He led investigators to the location where he had hidden the murder weapon, which later tested positive for blood and the victim's hair. Additionally, he turned over the pair of blood-stained pants he had been wearing at the time of the killings, providing further evidence of his direct involvement in the brutal attacks. His last words were, "I'd like to let the public know that the wrong they're doing now, it compounded the wrong I did years ago. It ain't no justification, ain't no fairness. That's all I gotta say, and they know it's right." There are no records of his final meal. Arthur Martin Boyd Jr., October 21, 1999, lethal injection. Boyd stabbed his 32-year-old ex-girlfriend, Wanda Hartman, 37 times in front of her mother and daughters after she refused his requests to reconcile. Boyd had a lengthy criminal past. At the age of 14, he was arrested for the first time. He has also been convicted of theft, assaulting police, essaying a 14-year-old female, and drunk driving. His last meal consisted of a medium-rare steak, French fries, and a tossed salad with oil and vinegar dressing. When asked for a final statement, Boyd said, "I feel deep regret and sorrow for the victims' families. I hope that after this is over, they'll be able to find peace." Before the execution, Boyd discussed his motives with reporters. He claimed to have heard voices telling him that Hartman's death would be a sacrifice for a new world. David Jr. Brown, November 19, 1999, lethal injection. Brown was found guilty of the murders of 26-year-old Shelley Diane Chalflynch and her daughter Christine, age 9. On August 24, 1980, they were discovered stabbed hundreds of times in their flat in the Pinehurst Hotel's former employees' quarters. The trail of bloody footprints from the Chalflynch's apartment to Brown's, his silver signet ring discovered beneath Diane's liver, and his bloody palm print on the wall of her bedroom were all overwhelming pieces of evidence against him. Brown's last meal consisted of fried chicken, fries, and a Pepsi. During his final statement, Brown declared his faith in Allah, thanked his mother and friends, addressed the family of his victims, stating he never intended harm, and hoped for forgiveness, and instructed the warden to proceed. Michael Earl Sexton, November 9, 2000, lethal injection. Kimberly Cruz, a social worker and counselor at a pediatric clinic with Raleigh's Wake Medical Center, was abducted on August 8, 1990, from the hospital parking lot by Sexton, who was also employed at the hospital. He forced her into her minivan and drove her to a wooded area where he essayed and strangled her to death. Cruz's body was discovered inside the van several hours later. Sexton had a prior conviction for assault, adding to his history of criminal behavior. He requested a last meal consisting of a Philly cheesesteak sub and a Pepsi. He did not make a final statement. Willie Irvin Fisher, March 9, 2001, lethal injection. After a heated dispute with his girlfriend over custody of their daughter, Johnson filed a domestic battery complaint against Fisher. Later that night, Fisher forcibly entered the home where his girlfriend lived with her mother and attacked her, stabbing her in the chest. Despite intervention by her family, he dragged her outside, continuing to stab, beat, and kick her. During the assault, her 14-year-old daughter was also stabbed while trying to protect her mother. Fisher eventually stopped and fled after a neighbor fired a gun into the air. He called the police and surrendered himself the following day. He had no prior criminal record, and his intoxication defense was rejected at trial. He had no last words and no final special meal. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.